In New York and Chicago, you gotta look up. These cities were the great laboratories for skyscraper design. But now, emerging cities of the Far and Middle East are breaking new ground and reaching new heights. Dozens of supertall and megatall buildings will arise there in the next decade. Her first skyscraper book was published in 1996. Now, Judith Dupre has updated that work with a survey and homage to Skyscrapers, a history of the world's most extraordinary buildings. The book is physically breathtaking, featuring amazing photographs of these soaring structures, capturing their monumental scale, discussing construction details, and including historical context, profiles of the building's architects, and honest discussion of the challenges faced and the solutions found to create supertalls in some of the Earth's most challenging environments. I'm so pleased to have Judith Dupre here with me today to talk about her new book and to explore the new frontier she has immersed herself in. I'm Alice Bloom. This is A Town and Village 2. Welcome back, and welcome to you, Judith, my favorite architectural historian.
Oh, thank you, Alice. Thrilled to be here.
Well, I am thrilled. Of course, we've read monuments, we've read churches, we've read skyscrapers before, but this book really blew me away. I know that's a terrible way to say it, but it is just one of the most gorgeous books I've ever seen. And while I don't have any affection for buildings usually, I do for the skyscrapers that you featured here. Now, if we had to look back and say, what's the first skyscraper, what would you say? Not modern, which would be the first tall building?
Well, I claim it's the home insurance building in Chicago.
Okay.
From the late 1880s. But there's a lot of controversy about that. It's really, they call it the first skyscraper because it was the first building with a steel structure.
Okay, and that distinguishes it?
That was these steel cages. It was supposedly inspired by a bird cage.
Okay.
This steel cage keeps the building up as opposed to thick masonry walls, as you might use to build a Gothic cathedral, for instance.
Okay.
So it isn't, it's no longer with us, sadly. It's gone to, architectural heaven. However, it wasn't that tall, but that was the enabling technology, the steel cage, which allowed buildings to go up.
What was the reaction to it when it was built?
Oh, people were afraid building. They were afraid skyscrapers were going to fall down. There's some great graphics from the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about the Metropolitan Life Insurance Building, where on 14th Street, where there were incredible graphics showing the building. They were so tall, people were afraid that the buildings were going to fall down.
And of course, that didn't happen.
That didn't happen.
Okay. How long did it take before people were comfortable walking into these buildings or working in the buildings?
Well, Elijah Otis made it comfortable. He realized people get very grumpy if they have to climb more than 6 flights of stairs.
I could understand that.
So his fortunes, not to pun, rose with the skyscraper.
Okay.
So
we're talking about Otis elevators here.
Yes,
okay.
Otis elevators, still in business, still doing amazing elevators. So a lot was changing at that time. Mm-hmm. A lot was changing, and people were literally leaving their farms behind and coming into the big cities, into Chicago, into New York, to find their fortunes. So it might have been odd to go up to a tall building, but everything was new. Everything was different for many people coming into cities. So,
well, I remember when the World Trade Center, the old World Trade Center, was first built. Now, I guess that would have been the early 70s.
Yeah.
And I felt my recollection is there was an enormous amount of resistance to working in that building.
Yes.
People didn't like the sway. People claimed they could feel the building move.
Yes, well, you could.
And that's very disturbing.
Yes. But all buildings move. This building we're in right now is moving.
Okay, but we don't perceive it. We don't feel it.
We don't perceive it because it becomes more extreme as the building gets taller. But I think that the problem that people had with those buildings, the original trade towers, was that the plazas were so inhospitable. Yeah. It was built at a time where, there were just these big, flat, open spaces. And what happens with a tall building, they create weather, they create wind tunnels. So can you imagine crossing that plaza in the recent polar vortex that we've been having. I mean, it was cold and windy.
So did people just not, or the builders not think about that when they built it? Was it a surprise to them that it was so inhospitable?
I think that we have to remember that almost 50 years ago, the conversation about what makes a successful public space, how do people use space, that just wasn't even in the conversation.
Interesting.
Those trade towers were built to increase economic opportunities downtown, which they did.
Eventually.
Eventually.
Because I remember the resistance to moving in was why the Port Authority moved in, all the state office buildings,
Yes.
agencies moved into those buildings because it wasn't so easy to fill them.
Yeah.
But I want to back up for a second because I think you brought up a very interesting point, and that is how the buildings address the streetscape. How
Yes.
people experience the buildings.
Yes.
And one of the things about the old World Trade Center was rather formidable. I mean,
Yes, it was.
From a distance, you were awestruck. But some of the new buildings do have to incorporate themselves into existing areas or neighborhoods.
Yes.
And is that something that the buildings designers think about now? How will this building relate to the street, to people who are walking by?
Right. Well, that too, the idea of context, which is a sacrosanct architectural concept where the building needs to harmonize with its surroundings, whether in material, whether in its scale. That's also beginning to change. But I think, to get back to the trade towers, if you remember them, they rose straight up from that plaza.
Right.
They didn't have any of that wonderful lower detail. I mean, great buildings orient you. So if you look at a skyscraper, notice the first 3 floors usually are articulated in some way that make reference to human scale. Then we have the long shaft of the building, and then at the top, where again they become visible in the skyline, that's also articulated. So a good building lets you know where you are.
Okay.
And the Trade Center the design was very homogeneous, very anonymous, and I think that also added to people's perception of what those buildings were.
Do you think, though, they broke new ground? Oh, sorry for the pun. I didn't mean it. But because we experienced the Trade Center, we are perhaps more likely to accept the newer structures, the Supertalls that are being built today? Do you think we've overcome our resistance to these enormous, enormous scales?
Well, I think that certainly in the New York area, we're just very used to it.
You know, in reading the book, it occurred to me that in New York, you can walk down the street and not have any sense of the building that you're walking in front of. I mean, because while I say we do have to look up, most of us are on our way to work or shopping or the train or whatever, and you just really don't look up.
Right.
The new World Trade Center, of course, is impossible to miss from all over the city now.
Absolutely.
It just rises. You can see it from way uptown.
Yeah.
But the buildings that are being built in the Far East seem to be in vistas. They don't seem to be in cities the way our buildings are, in fitting into buildings that are 100 years old, or filling it onto the same street. And many of them are even cities of themselves.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What's happening in Asia, very specifically China, is what happened in this country 125 years ago. There's a reason why the skyscraper was born in America and not in Europe.
Okay, and that
Europe, we had space. We were a blank slate, just as China is a blank slate, where they have got the room, they've got rapid urbanization. People are moving quickly. I mean, tens of millions of people are moving into cities, so you need a place to put them. So I think that single isolated skyscraper that you might think of when you think of an Asian skyline, that'll be changing.
Now, when you say people are moving into citified areas, I've heard some of these buildings referred to as vertical cities.
Yes.
So they are multiple uses? Are they people living and working in the same buildings?
Living and working. And what they're beginning to do is they're beginning to put atrium and plaza spaces throughout the building. So if you're on the 100th floor and you have a hankering for Starbucks, you don't have to go all the way down to the street. You can just go to your friendly kind of little village on the 80th floor and get Starbucks and your dry cleaning and lunch and
And all that. Well, you know, it's interesting you say that because I recall in the Trade Center, one of the big objections to working there was that it took so long to get out.
Yes.
That when you know, most of us had errands to do at lunchtime, you're banking, you know, or a few other
Right.
chores to do. There was no time to eat lunch. You had time to get out of the building and get back up if you were lucky.
Right.
So they started to put services into the building so that you could take care of your obligations
Well,
that way.
the trade towers, in all fairness, also sat under one of the largest malls in the country. I mean, people forget that those stores underneath. That was a huge.
But were they there from the beginning, or were they added later?
No, they were there.
There from the beginning.
They were there.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure there was development, but the physical space for them was
maybe
there.
that was at the beginning. They weren't quite open.
Yeah.
Interesting, though, in reading about these fabulous buildings in the Far East, it seemed that the architects who were commissioned to build them were largely of Western nationalities.
Mostly Americans, yeah.
Why is that?
Because we have mastered skyscraper technology. When I say that, our architects and engineers. I mean, building a skyscraper is different than building a 10-story building, obviously. But architects like Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, leading skyscraper designers, these, you know, it's a global market. If you're in Dubai and you want a skyscraper, you want to go to the experts. So it's a great thing for American architects and engineers because they are working. Might not be working in this country, but they're working in
other places.
Overseas. Yeah.
Do they operate under the same constraints that they would operate under in the United States?
Yes.
Are there universal codes for buildings of this size?
Mother Nature is a universal code. I mean, it's gravity pretty much works the same way everywhere, as does wind. Wind is actually the great nemesis of the skyscraper.
Right.
So there are certain natural laws that must be followed.
Okay.
And you know, you'll see these horrendous images of poorly built skyscrapers in other countries that have fallen because of structural issues, but that's really
Not
rare.
anymore.
That's rare.
But some of the places,
the codes are very, very strict.
some of the places where these buildings are being constructed have huge challenges: earthquakes, tsunamis, typhoons. I mean, we've had some rather severe weather here, but we've not yet had a typhoon that I know of. How do they meet these challenges? I mean, how do you develop a code to deal with a typhoon?
Well, you need to build a building that is strong, but also flexible. You want to build a building that can deflect wind, confuse wind, right? So we're starting to see lots of curved buildings in places that have high winds, high typhoon winds. So the engineers are just doing extraordinary things.
How has 9/11 changed the building of skyscrapers?
Well, I think on an emotional level, there's a new appreciation for the skyline. I think that people missed those towers, and what's so wonderful about the new One World Trade Center going up is that it's filling that hole in the skyline. More practically speaking, the silver lining of 9/11, if you could say that, was that all kinds of new structural innovations have been put into place so that to protect the occupants and to protect firefighters.
Give me an example. What kinds of things are being done now?
For instance, they are using super strong concrete. That the One World Trade has an interior concrete core that is many, many times stronger than what's required by code. There are areas of refuge on every floor so that should something happen, people have a place to gather. There are simple things like fluorescent tape on the stairwells so that if the lights go out, you can actually have a way see, you know, how to get down. There are all kinds of biological filters built in. There are wider stairwells, so there's easier access for people in the building and also for firefighters. There's a whole raft of innovations that came about because of 9/11.
And it took an awfully long time to develop the codes and, of course, as we know, to build New World Trade Center.
Yes.
I'm sure there were lots of constituent groups who were arguing? Who were the people who...
We think it took a long time, but honestly, when you see how huge that building is, and you realize it's built over 11 subway lines, and a fair swath of the 8 million people who called themselves, called New York home were involved in that building, I don't know, I think 12 years is kind of lightning speed.
Really? Interesting.
14 years it'll be when it opens in 2015.
When we talk about building taller and taller, is there an ego involved in this? I mean, is there a competition going on amongst architects of who can build the tallest? Are we aiming for that, the mega tall?
Well, I think every architect would like to have that rare honor of having built the world's tallest, because there's only a handful. And I think you can't help but notice that there's only one skyscraper in this entire world that was designed by a woman. So it tends to be a male building type, just saying. But I think the egos belong to the developers.
Now, these buildings are fabulously expensive to build.
Fabulously expensive, but I'll tell you something. Think about Dubai. No one knew anything about Dubai. And then they put up the Burj Khalifa, tallest building in the world.
Is that the one that's called the Cupcake Tower?
The Cupcake Tower is what we made a Burj Khalifa Cupcake Tower, but it's not called, we call it the Cupcake Tower, but most people don't call it the Cupcake Tower.
I just thought it was very endearing for you to relate to a building that way.
Yes, well, anything covered with cupcakes is probably endearing, right? But what Sheikh Mohammed decided, they wanted to put Dubai on the map. They put the tallest building in the world up there, spectacularly tall. It worked. It succeeded.
Is that really the tallest building in the world now?
It is, for now.
For now. And how long do you think it will enjoy that status?
Not for much longer. I asked Adrian Smith, he's the architect who designed the Burj Khalifa, and I said, Adrian, how long will this be the tallest building in the world? And he said, for about 5 more years. Because that's what it will take. That's the amount of time it will take to build to the height of the Burj Khalifa. And he is designing one in Saudi Arabia as we speak, and that will be the newest, tallest.
Now, these buildings are fabulous consumers of energy.
Yes.
And yet many of them claim to be sustainable or utilizing green technology.
Right.
Is that really happening? Is that successful? Are they really, really conserving energy? Or are we just telling ourselves that they are?
I think that we are rapidly moving toward a new understanding of the skyscraper as a building type. It is always more practical to build 10-story buildings than one building that's 100 stories because of the cost of bringing services up. Bringing up elevators, bringing up plumbing. That's the cost of building high.
Well, and air conditioning, right? I mean, you can't open windows in buildings like this, so you've got to have air-controlled systems.
Right. So they are rapacious consumers of energy. Right. However, now architects and engineers are beginning to look at them and say, you know what? What can we exploit? One thing that you can exploit in a very tall building is wind energy. You can collect wind energy. You can also collect energy, believe it or not, from elevators. An elevator going down generates energy. There are the glass, solar collection. So all these things are starting to come together. Today, right now, if you and I decided we wanted to put up a skyscraper in the middle of Mamaroneck, I'm sure it'd get passed with the zoning.
I'm going to stand there and watch you before the zoning board, but okay.
Right, but I'm just saying, today, perhaps not. 5 years from now, I think we're going to see something completely different. One of the things that a skyscraper does that most people aren't aware of, especially the new ones, especially the ones going up in Asia, they are being built on mass transit lines. And that is the name of the game in terms of saving resources.
When you say built on mass transit lines, so that people actually exit from wherever they're coming from and enter right into the building? They never have to go look for their subway?
They don't even have to emerge from the ground. So they'll take a high-speed train. They can go under the building, get on a high-speed train, catch a meeting 2 hours away that with an ordinary train would take 10 hours, and they're there in 2 hours. And then they're home by 4 o'clock, without
ever really
emerging
been
into the air, which is kind of a scary thought. But the fact of the matter is this is the future of skyscrapers. When they're hooked up with public transit, they become increasingly green.
Has anybody done any psychological analysis of how people really respond to living and working in these buildings? Is there any kind of statistics on that or study of that?
I'm sure that that's been done. I don't know if I could address that in any meaningful way, but I think, you know, we all know people who love going up to an observatory.
Well, it's fun to go visit one, but I'm saying somebody who lives and works in a building like this where really they almost never get out. I mean, they may be on the balcony somewhere or in the atrium somewhere, but in most of those places they have to be shielded, right? They all have glass in front of them. The winds are so great that they're not really outdoors. But what's it like to just never really leave this building? Or take public transportation and never be outdoors and just work in these buildings, and you're always, how can I say, eclipsed or overwhelmed by the size and scale of the buildings. And I wonder what impact that has.
I think the perception of scale and that size really does disappear once you're living in the building and
you just get used to it.
Going to and from. The other thing that a very tall building allows, of course, is the retention of the area around it for parkland. So, you know, if you can build a skyscraper with access to public transit and green spaces, you're beginning to solve quite a few energy issues.
Architects have built visionary cities before, not necessarily with great success.
Yeah.
Why do we think this will be more successful?
Because I think that humanity our thinking as human beings is changing. It's evolving. People are beginning to realize that we are not the ones controlling the chessboard, that we need to work in tandem with nature. So I think that we're evolving as human beings. And so the places that we build can't help but evolve too.
Do you have a favorite skyscraper? I mean, the buildings featured in the book are just breathtaking. The Shanghai Tower.
Yes.
I mean,
Very cool.
I mean, I'm just blown away by these. The construction, and that's the one with the double glass panels that are cantilevered out 60 feet from the building.
Yes.
And rounded. I mean, these
rounded
buildings
and has a thermal envelope. So
envelope. There you go.
A thermal envelope, so that the wonderful, fantastic planted atriums, but that thermal envelope keeps it cool or keeps it warm depending on the season. So that's a great thing. But that building spirals upward to again deflect the wind.
Confuse the wind.
Confuse the wind.
Yeah, we want that wind confused.
Yeah.
What's amazing, these buildings are not only brilliantly huge, but they are beautiful. I mean, when you talk about the World Trade Center, I don't know that anybody ever described the first World Trade Center as beautiful. It was stark. I think that's actually an accurate description. These buildings are soft.
Yes.
And I almost want to touch. I mean, you know, you look at the pictures. The Shard, the one. I mean, I don't want to touch that because I feel like I'd get cut. But that's how I'm supposed to feel, right? Right. That's the one that Renzo Piano.
Yes, exactly. In London.
Right. And then there's the Gherkin, which is just pure humor to me.
And a fantastically green building, a fantastic building. Yes.
So, which would be your favorite building?
Well, I love all the ones that you've mentioned.
Okay. I mean, would one be
I
offended?
feel like a mother being asked to choose among her children. But I have to say, one building I have always loved is the Citicorp Center.
The Citicorp Center in New York?
Yes.
Now, that's the one that was very troubled. I mean, when it was first built, things had to be modified. Weren't there problems with that?
Yes. And I think they were modified. They were discussed in public. There was no hiding the issues. That building was, it's a very prescient building. I love its jaunty angle top. That's something new on the traditional skyscraper top. It was something new. I love the view when you're looking east on 53rd Street and just seeing it there. It incorporated lots of early energy efficiencies. In fact, it was supposed to be it was supposed to collect solar energy. And the technologies, well, it didn't happen because the technologies weren't in place, you know, in the 70s to do that on a massive scale. But what I love is, at the very base of the building is St. Peter's Church.
Right.
And that church was not going to move. And Hugh Stubbins, the architect, very ingeniously figured out a way to accommodate the church And the skyscraper is cantilevered out on top of this church. He also created all these public spaces. I'm sure everyone has been there too.
There are all kinds of meetings and you know, people getting together on in the ground floor all the time. It's like
all the time. People are sitting outside eating lunch. All the subways are there, easy subway access.
Right.
It's a very, very prescient building.
Interesting, because I never would have thought you'd consider that in the same category as some of these fabulous buildings being built.
Well, it'd be too easy for me to say I love the Chrysler Building, even though I do.
But that was of another generation. I'm talking about the really super talls now. What about the new Bank of America Tower?
Oh, I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, and that's right in Midtown Manhattan.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, right at 42nd. It's right at 42nd and 6th. And Rick Cook of Cook Fox designed that building, and he said something wonderful. They have a great public space, the public atrium, on the ground floor that's open to everyone. And he said he described it as the front porch to Bryant Park, which is right across the street, which I thought was a wonderful way to think about that building.
What always surprises me is we've watched that building go up, or we've watched the construction site, and in New York it's merely annoying, you know, having to walk across the street and then whatever. And then what emerges is this breathtaking building.
Yes, it's beautiful.
But once again, you got to look, kind of stop yourself and take a look now and again.
Yes.
There are buildings with funny names. There's the Cheese Grater in London.
Yeah.
The Cheese Grater. That's like, we have a lipstick building in New York, too. I mean, how funny does it get?
Yeah.
One innovation that I'd heard about.
The Brits love to nickname their skyscrapers.
I think that's just so cool. But some of the technology, didn't one architect come up with a moving scaffold in order to put, I think this was in Shanghai, if I'm not mistaken, because they couldn't get the glass installed correctly?
Right.
I mean, they had to come up with amazing innovations in order to
the amount of ingenuity that goes into making these buildings, it really is extraordinary.
Judith, I know that you have a great coup to tell me about. You've just been awarded a commission to write the book about the New World Trade Center.
The authorized biography of One World Trade Center.
Biography of a building.
So I'm working closely with the Port Authority and Skidmore, Owings & Merrill, the architects, and a host of others. So I'm really excited.
When do you think that it will be done?
Oh, I know it will be done by 2015.
Okay, will you come back and talk to me about it?
Oh, I would love to.
I can't wait. I know it'll be as brilliant and as beautiful as Skyscrapers.
Oh, thank you.
Judith, thanks so much for being my guest. It's always a pleasure.
Same. Absolutely. Thank you.
And you at home for watching, thank you so much. We'll see you next time. I'm Alice Bloom.